It was a stormy autumn night when 𝗕𝗢𝗓𝗏, a young paranormal investigator, arrived at the gates of Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky. The massive brick structure towered above the hillside like a sleeping giant. Its broken windows reflected the lightning, its walls humming with memories of the tens of thousands who had died there. Daniel had heard the legends his whole life. Phantom footsteps, voices in the darkness, and above all, the infamous body chute. He told himself he didn't believe in ghosts, that he was here to disprove the stories. But even as he crossed the threshold, the air shifted, cold, heavy, almost wet with decay. His boots echoed in the empty halls. Long corridors stretched ahead, lined with rooms where patients once lay, coughing their lungs out. Dust covered the beds, paint peeled from the walls, and the silence pressed against his ears. Then, he heard it, a cough, harsh and rattling like someone drowning in their own breath. It came from a room just down the hall. His flashlight flickered, steadied, and when he reached the doorway, the room was empty, but the coughing continued. Closer now, right behind him. He spun, light sweeping the hall. Nothing. And yet, his recorder later captured the cough clearly, followed by a whisper telling him to get out. Daniel pressed on to the second floor, where the children's ward once stood. Murals of faded cartoon animals still clung to the walls, their cheerful faces mocking the silence. He set up a camera, steadying his nerves. Then he heard laughter, high-pitched, childish giggles drifting from the corner. His beam landed on a dusty ball lying motionless until, before his eyes, it rolled toward him across the cracked floor. He froze. When he raised his flashlight for the briefest moment, he thought he saw a little girl in a hospital gown, her eyes hollow, standing in the doorway. Then she was gone. The ball rolled again, this time back into the shadows, and the laughter faded into the distance. By the time he reached the third floor, the smell hit him, metallic, sour, like rust or blood. The operating theater lay in ruin, but the old surgical table still stood at its center, leather straps dangling like dead vines. He touched a scalpel on the counter. It was so cold it burned. His flashlight snapped off. In the dark he heard movement, the scrape of metal, the shuffle of feet. When the light flicked on again, he saw shapes bent over the table, indistinct shadows of surgeons working, their outlines twitching. The recorder hissed with static, then a voice whispered, "We couldn't save them." Daniel staggered back, chest pounding, throat dry. He wanted to leave, but something compelled him upward. The fourth floor was said to be the most haunted of all. The hallway stretched like a black throat, endless doors yawning open. He shone his light down the corridor and froze. At the far end stood a tall figure, still as stone, its head tilted unnaturally, like a broken puppet. Daniel whispered a greeting, his voice cracking. The figure slowly leaned its head further, then stepped into one of the rooms. He forced himself to move forward, each step echoing louder than the last. When he reached the doorway, the room was empty, but the smell of rot made him gag. On the wall, deep gouges spelled a single word: stay. His flashlight shook in his hand. His mind screamed to leave, but his body carried him to the basement. The entrance to the body chute gaped like the throat of a grave. The tunnel sloped down into endless black. This was where they had lowered the dead, hundreds, maybe thousands, sliding into darkness so the living above would never see. Daniel switched on his camera, muttering, exploring the chute. The walls were damp, dripping. His footsteps echoed as he descended. Then another set of steps echoed back, slow, deliberate, coming up toward him. His breath caught. He shouted, "Who's there?" The steps continued closer and closer, but no answer came. His light died. The recorder erupted with sound. Not just one voice, but hundreds, thousands, coughing, wheezing, screaming, whispering. A wave of agony surged through the tunnel. The floor trembled beneath him. Cold hands clawed at his ankles, unseen fingers digging into his arms, dragging him down. He thrashed, shouting, kicking, but the voices only grew louder, overlapping into a shriek that shook the tunnel walls. He fell into the dust, choking, until suddenly everything stopped. Silence pressed in like a weight. His light blinked back on. He was alone at the very bottom of the chute, his recorder lying beside him. He stumbled out hours later, pale and shaking, found by a security guard making rounds. His camera was shattered, but his recorder was still running. The tape was played back dozens of times, and every listener swore they heard it. The coughing, the screaming, the whispers begging him to stay. And at the very end, just before the recording cut off, a final voice hissed close to the microphone. "You belong here now." They say Daniel never returned to Waverly Hills, but if you walk by the old body chute late at night, some claim they still hear a man's voice echoing up from the dark, calling for help, calling for anyone who will listen. It was just past midnight when Ryan Keller stepped through the rusted gates of Cassadaga Cemetery. The Florida night was thick with humidity, the kind of air that clung to your lungs and made each breath feel heavier than the last. His flashlight beam trembled over leaning gravestones, moss-covered angels, and cracked marble crosses. He was 21, a college student, and this was supposed to be just another dare. His friends had bet him $100 to sit in the infamous Devil-S chair and prove it was nothing but a creepy story told to scare tourists. Ryan didn't believe in ghosts, curses, or whispered legends. But even so, when he first laid eyes on the stone chair, his stomach sank. It sat between two graves, carved from rough stone, weathered by decades of storms. Locals said the devil himself sat there at night, waiting for anyone foolish enough to take his place. People claimed they heard whispers. Some claimed they felt unseen hands on their shoulders, and a few swore they saw glowing eyes in the dark when they dared to look away. Ryan laughed nervously. "Easy money," he muttered, setting his phone to record. He sat down. The stone was colder than he expected, biting through his jeans as if it had been carved from ice. At first, nothing happened. The cemetery was silent except for the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves. He leaned back, smirking, already planning how he'd brag about this tomorrow. But then the air shifted. The crickets stopped. The wind died. The silence became so deep, it pressed against his eardrums, leaving him with the sound of his own heartbeat. That was when the stone began to vibrate beneath him. Subtle at first, like the purr of a machine far away. His grin faded. "Earthquake," he whispered. But it wasn't the ground. It was the chair itself, humming, alive. He tried to laugh, but the sound caught in his throat. And then he heard it. A voice, right against his ear. A whisper that wasn't his own. The words were low, drawn out, curling into his mind like smoke. "Stay." Ryan shot up, heart hammering, but his body didn't move. His legs refused to respond. His arms locked at his sides. It was as if invisible hands were pinning him down. He forced his voice through clenched teeth. This is stupid. It's not real." The whisper came again, clearer this time. cutting into the silence. "Do you want to know a secret?" The air turned icy. His breath came out in visible clouds. He tried to call out for his friends, but his voice died in his throat. The whisper shifted, crawling through his skull like it was inside his head. "I can tell you how you died." Ryan shook his head violently. "Shut up, you're not real." The stone pressed harder against his back, as if it were swallowing him. The voice laughed, low, guttural, not human. "I know the hour, the place, the way your last breath leaves you." Suddenly, his phone, still recording, buzzed in his pocket. He could feel the vibration, but couldn't lift his hand to grab it. On the faint glow of the screen, a message appeared. Though he hadn't touched it, 3 words, typed in black letters across the glass. "Look behind you." His pulse roared. Every nerve screamed not to turn, but the whisper pressed again, hissing like steam. "Do it." Slowly, against his will, Ryan's head turned. The beam of his flashlight had fallen across the graves beside the chair. At first, nothing moved. Then, the earth shifted. Soil began to rise, as if something were clawing its way upward. He stared in disbelief as skeletal fingers broke through the ground, dragging themselves free. A hollow face pushed through the dirt, jaw gaping, eyes black sockets. But it wasn't one body. It was many hands, skulls, broken forms, writhing beneath the grass, pressing against the earth, as though the cemetery itself was trying to breathe. Ryan screamed, but the sound never left his lips. The whisper filled his ears, louder now, a chorus of voices overlapping, chanting his name. "Ryan, Ryan, Ryan." The chair shook violently. His vision blurred, the edges of his sight darkening. He struggled with all his strength, finally breaking free enough to tumble forward onto the ground. He scrambled to his feet, gasping, stumbling toward the gate. Behind him, the whispers followed. Not one voice now, but hundreds, hissing and laughing. His flashlight flickered, casting wild shadows across the headstones. He didn't dare look back, not until he reached the road outside. When he finally turned, the cemetery was silent again. The chair sat empty, still and cold, as if nothing had happened. His phone lay cracked in the dirt where he had fallen. When he picked it up, the recording was still playing. Shaking, he pressed play. At first, it was only his own nervous laughter, the scrape of his jeans against the stone. Then came the silence, the hum, and then the whisper. But what froze his blood was what came at the end. His own voice, crying out, screaming, begging to move. Yet his mouth had never opened. He listened in horror, as the voice that sounded like him whispered back into the microphone, "I will come for you." Ryan never collected his $100. He never spoke of that night again. But those who dare to sit in the devil's chair still claim they hear whispers, still feel the stone vibrate, and some even say that if you sit long enough, the devil doesn't just whisper secrets. He leaves something inside you, something that waits, patient and smiling, until the hour of your death. And maybe, just maybe, that is why the chair is never empty. Because every soul who sits upon it leaves a part of themselves behind and takes a shadow with them into the world outside the gates. It was almost midnight when Daniel caught the Greyhound bus leaving Phoenix for Los Angeles. The station was nearly empty, the storm outside making the night feel heavier. The driver, a tall man with sunken eyes, gave Daniel a brief nod as he boarded. Only a few passengers sat scattered across the seats. Daniel slid into the back row. He was exhausted from the day's travel and told himself he'd sleep until sunrise. But almost as soon as the bus pulled onto the highway, he noticed something odd. The passengers never moved. Not a cough, not a sigh, just blank stares forward. At the first stop, the driver opened the door, though no one got on or off. Rain poured down, but Daniel swore he saw a figure waiting by the road, a woman in a soaked dress. She didn't move, didn't blink. The driver nodded at her, then shut the door, driving off without a word. By the second stop, the air grew colder. Daniel leaned forward, glancing at the passengers. Their faces looked pale, waxy, almost like mannequins. One man's head lolled to the side, mouth hanging open in a silent scream. Daniel's heart raced. He stood and walked down the aisle. None of them reacted, not even when he waved a hand in front of their eyes. His breath fogged in the freezing air, and when he looked back, the woman in the soaked dress was now sitting 2 rows behind him. Daniel stumbled back to his seat. He tried speaking to the driver, but the man didn't answer, eyes locked on the endless black road. The windshield wipers scraped, but outside wasn't rain anymore. It was static, like a broken TV screen pressing against the glass. Suddenly the bus lights flickered. The passengers all turned their heads at once, their empty eyes fixing on him, their mouths opened in unison, releasing a low, droning hum. Daniel bolted to the back emergency door, clawing at the latch. It wouldn't budge. The hum grew louder, rattling the windows. He turned and found the soaked woman standing right in front of him, her face inches away. Her lips barely moved as she whispered, "You're the last passenger." The lights went out. By morning, the bus was found parked on the side of an empty desert road, doors open, completely empty. No passengers, no driver, just a single bag in the last row, Danielle's. Locals say that on stormy nights, drivers on the Phoenix-LA route sometimes see a Greyhound bus with its lights flickering, filled with pale, silent faces staring out the windows. No license plate, no sound, just the hum of voices following you long after it passes.